Here we go. Okay. So today's lesson is on technological advancement. So that is a slight bit of the history of technology lesson in terms of science. So it is essentially how we have gotten to the point where we are now. And this was a very, very difficult lesson for me to write because in different parts of the world, this took place at different times. So the times are just approximations of what I wrote about here. And it is remarkably hard to essentially try and figure out exactly what happened where due to this fact that it happened in different parts of the world at different points in time. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is what drives people to make technology, people to go through technological advancement, to make new things and better things the whole time. So there are essentially three driving forces when we talk about technology. So our driving forces are these three things. Our first thing is we need to have a need for something to be made, a very, very definite need. So, for example, say you have a slight population boom, which means that you now need to have make more food because there's now more people to feed. Otherwise, people are going to die of starvation. You're going to enter into very, very difficult times and people are going to die off. So in order to address that need, you would then make, say, more technology in terms of cultivating crops or something like that. So the first driving force is a need. The second driving force is if you have some free time in a population, then you can start trying to develop new things, spending the time to make new things in order to free up some more time of someone else maybe. So the second thing is free time. If a society, a village does well enough together so that one person out of that village can pursue something else, some higher learning of some kind, that is when you are going to start getting technological advancement. So you need to have free time. And the last one is the sharing of information. If you have one person coming up with some kind of technology to do this one thing, and another person comes at it from a different angle and tries to develop a different kind of technology, then these two people getting together and sharing their information in between each other actually means that you would get a much better final product in the end because each of them learns from someone else. So let me start with this technological advancement lesson at the Stone Age. Now, please note, I'm only using these words due to the fact that this is pretty much the prevalent words that are used in terms of history, paleontology, all of these things, archaeology, things like that. So the Stone Age started about 2.5 million years ago. And the first kind of stone tools was literally a rock. You pick up a rock, you can use this rock to do other things. You can hit other rocks with them to essentially do something, shape the other rock into a specific shape if you'd like. You can use this rock sort of as a hammer. By using this rock, you can hit a nut and break open the shell much easier. So the first kinds of tools were literally very, very simple tools. It was things like chipped rock knives, scrapers, and hammerstones. And it was literally single things. It could be one rock that you would chip into two, and that would give you two rocks with a sort of a sharp edge that you can then use in order to make your daily life slightly easier. So We have things like chipped rock knives, scrapers, and hammerstones. Okay, so very, very basic things. But the thing is that since you had some of these in order to try and help make your daily life easier, you could then use these tools in your free time in order to make some other tools. You could use these to essentially carve bones into sort of different shapes. You could make some wooden tools, sort of things. So the next kind of tools that we get in terms of technological advancement would be things like bone and wood tools. We also get things that are essentially two types of things strapped together. So a stick with a rock strapped to it as a sort of a hand axe. So things like hand axes. We start seeing this. So this took place over tons of years. This is a very, very long process because in terms of how humanity was at that stage is it was very, very small family groups. It was literally less than 10 people, 10 to 15 people max, living together at any one point in time. And everyone had to do essentially everything. It was hard. If you wanted to get food, you had to walk for quite a long while in order to forage for food, trying to find it. You had to hunt. It was a hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle. Yes, these tools, sort of chipped rock knives, scrapers, hammerstones, they tended to make things better. You could do a few things with these kinds of tools. But the technological advancement in terms of this was very, very slow because there wasn't free time available in these sort of family groups. It's only later when we start getting more people together that you could sort of, some people could pick up the slack enough so that someone could have enough free time to drive through economic advancement. So they started using fire in this age. And they started using fire to harden bones, harden wood, in order to make sharper, essentially arrow tips, things like that. They started making simple clothing. Now, I'm not talking very elaborate t-shirts and things. I am talking literally, it would be animal skin-based or leaf-based clothing that came here. So it was either based on animal skins or on leaves. You don't get very much extra things here. So in the later part of the Stone Age, and I'm talking this took millions of years, literally, we end up getting things like simple textiles. This is where people start spinning things. So they would start making ropes out of essentially grass or things like that that they could twist together in order to get that sort of rope thing. They figured out that if they somehow take the grass, whack it enough, they could get the fibers on the inside of the grass in order to turn that, spin that into finer thread that they could weave together. So we start seeing very simple textiles. It's still fairly rough. It's not very fine, but we start seeing textiles. We start seeing ceramics. We start getting the domestication of animals. And we start seeing tribes more than just family groups. So this is towards the end of essentially what I call here the Stone Age. We start seeing these sorts of things. Each of these technological advances allow people to survive better, live slightly longer. if someone can live a bit longer, they can maybe have the experience to drive technology slightly forward. So the simple textiles would mean that you could have blankets, you could have clothes, you could have tent coverings, sort of things. So if people could stay warmer during the winters, they could live longer, they could essentially help make more technology. Ceramics helped a lot. Domestication of animals. Once you don't need to run after a group of animals the whole time, you just keep the group with you. It saved a ton of time in terms of literal labor hours. So that domestication of animals started getting greater groups of people together. And with greater groups, you could start having division of labor. So everyone doesn't need to do everything. You could start having specializations. And when you start having specializations, you could start having more specific tools instead of general use tools. So then we get to the metal ages. So this is the essential copper, bronze, and iron ages. And I am lumping them together. So this started about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, the essential metal ages. In different parts of the world, they started earlier. In other parts of the world, they started later. It's very hard to put a date on these things because just it happens in different places in the world. So during the metal age, we start seeing furnaces. They started understanding heat flow enough to be able to make something that could stay very hot, sort of like an oven, a furnace. They started smelting metals. At the start of the metal ages, if they found a big chunk of copper, they could then use that chunk of copper to make something. But later during the metal ages, they started realizing that if they take the rock that this chunk of copper comes from, heat it up a lot, then you end up getting the actual metal out of it, and that metal that you could then use. So you start seeing smelting metals, you start seeing forges, where they can take the metal, heat it up, and then hit it with a hammer in order to shape it into different shapes. You start seeing alloys like bronze, where they are starting to deliberately mix the ratios of metals in order to get specific things. So we start seeing other things like carts. We start seeing villages. We start seeing civilizations. The kinds of civilizations I'm thinking about here are the South American Inca civilizations. They are essentially Iron Age civilizations. The Greek and Roman civilizations also fall under this sort of umbrella, if I can call it that. We start seeing simple machines. By simple machines, I mean it is all sorts of things based on levers, pulleys, and wedges in order to help lift things, move things, all sorts of things like that. The Egyptian pyramids were built literally using levers, pulleys, and wedges in different ways in order to get the stones that high. So it's not hard. It's simple machines. It just takes a lot of people in order to be able to get to the point where these things can be used. We start seeing plows with agriculture, and we start seeing writing and the recording of information in different ways. This is not just cave drawings anymore. We are starting to see actual writing. There are people in this age whose jobs it literally is just to record everything that is being done. And the reason for this is we've got enough people together now so that there is some free time for people to actually start recording the information. If we have recording of information, we've got things like carts, horses that can travel. We get sharing of information. So this starts essentially speeding up the process of technological advancement. So if you look here, this was 2.5 million years ago, more or less. This is about 5,000-6,000 years ago, depending on the places in the world. Now we get to the agricultural age, which is about 2,500 years ago. So I'm calling this the agricultural age. The kind of ages that fall under here would be the medieval or Middle Ages and medieval ages in Europe. It could also be all sorts of other kinds of ages, especially in Asia, in all sorts of different parts of the world. I'm calling it the agricultural age because that is where the greatest amount of forward driving force in technological terms took place. And that would be in agriculture and in basic manufacture of things in order to make it easier for the people. So we start seeing water wheels, which uses gears, big gears made out of wood, not small gears that you could see in a watch. These are big gears. They're literally two big discs of wood with little poles stuck through them that one can slot into another. So we start seeing water wheels, which are used in things like a water mill. That's terrible. There we go. In order to make flour. You don't have to use a grindstone, literally use your hands with a grindstone to grind up the flour anymore, which takes hours. You could now take it to a water mill, and there they would essentially, you would pour it in on the one side, it would grind between some stones, and you would get flour out on the other. We start getting small industries. Especially next to rivers where you have a water wheel to help drive things. Small industries like a brewery to make beer. If you can't trust the water, you can actually trust the beer, because the beer, the yeast inside during the brewing stage of the beer and the making of the alcohol inside the beer would actually kill off all of the bad sort of bacteria and pathogens and things. So while water wouldn't be safe to drink, any kind of beer and things made would actually be safe to drink. So everyone drank things like that. You start getting things like a pottery that makes bowls, vases, all sorts of other things that people can use. We start seeing fabric mills, where they would essentially, you could either make your own cloth at home using a loom and a spinning wheel and lots of time. You could then take it to a fabric mill to be processed further. Fabric mills would also be, there would be spinners and weavers at the fabric mill in order to make fabric that you could then buy. So we start seeing small industries and things. We start seeing plumbing. I'm thinking of things like aqueducts. This is not very sophisticated plumbing. We've got aqueducts, we've got things like reservoirs, we've got dams that are starting to be built. We start seeing building and architectures. Buildings, we start seeing architecture. We start seeing things like arches, spiral stairs that require more mathematics in order to build. We start seeing bricks made from clay instead of just stones that are used to make the buildings. All sorts of things. In terms of other driving forces, war is a very big driving force. So we start seeing armor and weapons, especially bigger kinds of weapons like a ballista. We start seeing ships, actual ships, not just tiny boats that you could go out onto the sea and do some fishing with. Ships that are designed specifically to take goods from one place to another. So the ships are, again, a means of communication with other people that could share ideas and get technological advancement going. So this went on for quite a while. Well, a very short amount of time if you consider it compared to the Metal Ages or the Stone Age. Then we get to the Industrial Age. This started in about the 1700s. So from about 2,500 years ago, we're now in the 1700s. And this is when the Industrial Age started. So the Industrial Age has an actual thing that we can point to and say, that is the thing that started the Industrial Age, and that was coal. They started mining coal because they realized that coal is a very, very good power source, and you could use it instead of wood in order to make a fire and drive different kinds of things. They started making steam engines based on coal. You now no longer just need a water wheel in order to run things like you did in this age. You can now start having this power system in wherever you go, just due to the fact that you can use coal, burn it, heat up water, making steam to drive a turbine that you could then use. We start seeing all sorts of machines that make the more labor-intensive parts of the previous ages much easier. We start seeing machines that could spin thread, like the spinning jenny. After the spinning jenny, we start seeing big looms being made, more mechanical looms, especially because they've got flying shuttles that could rapidly go back and forth in order to weave fabric. So the process of making fabric that people can wear started getting a lot quicker because it was starting to be mechanized. So you would see the industrialization of all sorts of various areas, especially clothes. You started seeing industrialization of other areas, metalworking. You would get, instead of one person being a master metalsmith and learning all of the different areas, you would get one person just specializing in making horseshoes. So he could make a bajillion horseshoes in a day very easily, things like that. Instead of having one person be able to do everything, you would have more specialization, which essentially frees up time. We start seeing trains. So trains is one of the biggest driving forces in communication. This was the first time that you could write a letter and have it be delivered the next day, especially in places like Britain, in Europe, areas like that. This was the first time that something like this could happen, that you could have very, very fast communication. It's not internet fast yet. We're getting there. So we start seeing the first bits of mass production. And we start seeing factories. These factories are still largely labor-driven, but we start seeing factories. We get steam turbines that let us make electricity. So we have electricity in this age. It's just not very widely available yet. It's mostly available to industrial applications, places like factories, to the homes of richer people, things like that. So in about the 1800s is when electricity starts becoming more widespread, when they start putting up things like the national grid. So that's where we get to next, the electronic age. We start getting national electricity grids. We start getting things like light bulbs and radios. Especially these that are becoming more and more and more available to common people. We get more electronic devices instead of mechanical devices. Things are not just powered by gears anymore. You now see things being powered by electrical motors instead of mechanical energy. So we have electrical appliances. Okay, we start seeing the precursors to computers. We're starting to get to electronic processors and things like that, but we don't have full-fledged computers yet. It's still coming. So then we start to get to the computing age. Now we're only about 50 years ago. So from about the 1850s to the 1950s is the electronic age. That's when we see lots and lots of electronic gadgets. We start seeing essentially the start of commercialization, having it be more of a buyer's market sort of thing. Now we start to get to the computing age. This is from about the 1950s to the 1990s. It started slightly earlier in World War II, but this actually starts gaining some momentum a little later. So during the computing age, we start going from vacuum tube technology mainframes. So the mainframes are computers that are as big as a room, as a building. They're huge. So, and they were very, very expensive. So instead of having your own computer that you could work on, you would have one computer in a essentially building, and everyone in the building would have to get time on the computer. There would be a few places where you could actually connect to the computer. It would be one computer with like 4 screens and 4 keyboards where 4 people could work. And if you wanted to have your program run in the computer, you would put it on little punch cards, and then you would feed these punch cards into the computer, and its output would literally be printed on the other side. It's insane. It's huge things. It's expensive things to run, and their computing power was fairly limited. So from mainframes, big PCs like that, we start coming to the personal computer. This is a PC. It is a standing box PC that you would get. But this is the first time that it was small enough and cheap enough for essentially more people to be able to get computers. So this is the evolution that takes place here in terms of technology. So from the 1990s onwards, that is when the internet started. And that is essentially what starts our whole information age, is the big internet. This is essentially communication at a much, much faster scale than has ever been there before. It's essentially near instantaneous. So we start seeing the internet. We start seeing rapid communication. And now, instead of the technological drive being on making physical objects, as has been all the time before, now the technological drive gets to more of a data perspective. The technological drive is about analyzing and collecting data. It's about quick access to information. So it's a very, very interesting place to be. And we are still in the information age. We're just not quite sure where it's going. So what comes next? Some people think that next comes something like the augmented age, which is where we don't have to know the things anymore. We can just ask our devices, okay, Google, could you tell me this? And it would. Some people think it's going to be the integrated age, where all of our devices are communicating with each other. Our fridge is busy placing an order for some more vegetables because the vegetables inside of it is going off. That sort of thing. All of our devices are busy communicating with each other. Some people think the next age is going to be essentially an age of reckoning, where we are going to have to look at all of the processes we have set out up to now and then redo all of them, but better. So take a hard look at all of the processes we have, how we are doing things, redoing them from scratch, making new processes, implementing new processes on a global scale. So that would be very, very hard. But some people think this is what's going to happen. So to be honest, what comes next in terms of technology, I have no idea. We're going to have to see. So yeah, we are still smack bang in the information age. So thank you guys for coming, and I will see you guys again next week. Farewell.